Everybody ready?
Yes.
Okay. Welcome to our Spring 2023 Supply Chain and Business Analytics Symposium. My name is Renu Ramnarayan, and I'm a faculty member in the Computing and Decision Sciences Department, where our supply chain programs and our business analytics programs are housed. I'm also the co-director of the Master of Science in Business Analytics program. I see our Director of Graduate Admissions is in the audience here. And I say that because if any of you are interested in graduate programs, not only in supply chain and business analytics, but any of our graduate program at Stillman, he'd be happy to make an appointment with you. Okay, this evening our panel consists of 3 speakers from 3 different organizations. Welcome. Jim Headley is the president of M&M Quality Solutions, a 3PL that offers warehousing and logistics, as well as supply chain management services to clients. Prior to his work at M&M, Jim was the president of Smart Warehousing and vice president of sales for Mexico at UPS Supply Chain Solutions. He has over 25 years of experience in supply chain and specializes in warehousing, international logistics, and omni-channel fulfillment. Jim studied abroad at the University of Costa Rica and has a BA in liberal arts from the University of Kansas. Laura, sitting next to him, is the Director of Trade Compliance for Firmenich, a privately held flavor and fragrance company located in Plainsboro, New Jersey. She has been with Firmenich for 25 years and is responsible for ensuring the company's compliance with international trade regulations while supporting the company's strategic objectives and initiatives. Laura provides on-site compliance training to internal stakeholders, as well as managing the company's foreign trade zone. Laura graduated with a BS in Finance from Rutgers University and is a licensed customs broker. Lindy, sitting next to Laura, Lindy Gold, is a vice president of solution sales at Cargo Trans Inc. And has been in the global logistics industry for almost a decade. In her role at the company, Lindy is responsible for uncovering new opportunities through intuitive, unique, and tailored global supply chain solutions. Lindy is responsible for providing customers with the tools of advanced analytics, compliance expertise, and international and domestic logistics services to help them manage and grow their businesses. Lindy graduated with a BS from the Robert H. Business School, University of Maryland, College Park. This evening, our topic is navigating the rough waters of supply chain in today's world. The panel will discuss relevant hot topics in supply chain and how companies and service providers are learning to adjust during these uncertain times. World events such as the pandemic, wars, political unrest, natural disasters, and the like have impacted supply chains. The panel will discuss their impacts and strategies to proactively protect supply chains and mitigate the risks associated with these uncertainties. After the panel discussion, we will have a Q&A session. For the in-person audience, we have a mic that Leah will bring to you. Just raise your hand. And for the remote audience, you can drop your questions in chat. So without further ado, let's get started. one of our student chapter e-board members, who's going to help us with the chat.
Randy, do you want this mic? Well, see.
That's better. That's much better. You have another one, right? Oh, okay. Okay. So after a stream of supply chain issues, business leaders have realized that the strategic importance of supply chains to the overall health of their organizations. It probably was not a top concern. Perhaps it was an afterthought for the C-suite before COVID. And I'm talking mostly about small and medium-sized businesses. Now it has become a front and center issue for everyone. And while COVID put a huge spotlight on supply chains and their fragility, there are other issues that can throw a company's supply chain into a tailspin. For example, the grounded container ship blocking the Suez Canal, winter storms in Texas, war in Ukraine, and so on. So I'm going to ask the three of you a broad and kind of an obvious question. Both Jim and Lindy are in 3PL logistics. Laura is in Firmenich, a manufacturing organization. The simple question is, while we as customers saw empty shelves, high prices, rationing, what was going on within your organization? How were you trying to put all these fires out? Anyone can start.
I'll start. So, pre-pandemic, supply chain was definitely not, the topic of everyone's conversation. Once the pandemic hit the U.S. February 2020, my mom, my grandma, my neighbor, everyone became, an expert in supply chain. Everyone had an opinion because it became the topic of everyone's conversation. And as a service provider, I was always having these conversations with the logistics department, but then, like Renu said, all of a sudden the C-suite isn't interested, the CEO, the owner, because as the shift in demand happened, everyone went from events and eating out and vacations. They then started buying everything they could for their home, from their home. And so what that did to the supply chain in regards to the international, starting from ordering the shipments with manufacturers in Asia, for example, and then the carriers needed to have the space to bring the containers over to the US. As a supply chain service provider, we found a lot of difficulties within there. So there were too many ships arriving at once. At times there was, 100 ships at the port of LA and Long Beach waiting at the port, which on a good day, my transportation manager would say, oh, there's only 40 ships today. So it just was overloaded. There weren't enough containers, so all the orders that were being placed, there wasn't enough equipment to fill it. So there was a lot of issues happening all at the same time. And the best that we could do as a service provider is communication and just making sure that our customers knew exactly what was going on. And it was a lot more work to get one container, whereas prior there was, not the exact same, not anywhere close to that type of extreme, work to get a container here.
And then on the warehouse side, we were on the receiving end of the containers when they finally got there. And one of the big challenges we had, and we had many, but a lot of the product, our customers had already sold it. And their customers were waiting for it. And it was still in China or still in the ocean or still sitting on the port in LA. And then it all arrived at once when it really started to come. So then the warehouses started filling up and we didn't have room. And then there was no more trucks available to get the delivery. And there was just problem after problem after problem, all because of the domino effect that happened. And the challenges were something I don't think anybody could have planned for. You could have had a plan, but it would have blown up. And I know a lot of people are working hard now to figure out, and we can get into that here in a little bit later, but it was kind of a perfect storm.
I think also, Jim, something in your world is there were pre-existing issues even before the pandemic happened. So truck drivers were, not a high commodity at the time. So when this all came and you want to get 50 containers for your company out at one time because it was all backlogged, it was almost impossible.
I was just going to say, as an importer, I agree with everything you guys are saying. So for us as an importer, we had to diversify our supply chain and our suppliers and where we could get our raw materials based on the availability with COVID. And then exactly what Jim said, once they got here, we had to rush them either into production or if we bought too much, because we had to take what we could get when we could get it, and then have the availability of where we were going to store it, in the port. If a driver could go and pick it up, sometimes it was released from customs and it would sit there. You'd end up having to pay demurrage because you couldn't get a trucker to go into the port to pick it up. So all these different things at once, and trying to manage them and keeping your costs down was a pretty interesting time.
Yeah, and just to point out too, from a cost perspective, the cost of an ocean container coming from China to the port in LA, I think it got to be $12,000 a year from now. Or a year ago, up to 20.
Yeah,
Up
it was
to 20.
Yeah.
But just a year ago, it was 12,000.
yes, yes.
And now it's down less than 2,000.
Yeah, it literally dropped to zero. So it started at like 2,000, then it went up to 20,000, and now it's back down. So in September last year, September last year, 2021, is when it kind of hit that peak. And anyone who asked us, what does the future look like? How long is this going to last for? Every expert in the industry said it's going to be for months, maybe even years. And then all of a sudden, the pendulum started to shift, and the rate of a container really decreased tremendously. And so no one expected it to happen so fast. It's almost like payback to the carriers.
Yeah.
Because they were making money hand over fist.
I'm okay with that.
You're okay with it, right. So it was pretty crazy how quickly it changed, and it's still every week continues to go down. They keep saying it's going to hit the bottom, it's going to hit the bottom, and here we are, still going.
Thank you, Mark. That's why I invite him. That is exactly why I invite him. Laura, you're responsible for trade compliance. Can you talk a little bit about your job?
So my role is Customs and Trade Compliance for North America, and I'm also responsible for, actually for the Americas, and we're also responsible for optimization for duty spend, which relates to supply chain, because, with the ocean freight, not paying duty on that. So we look at how to bring things into the country in a compliant way, but also to reduce our spend on those things. So we work very closely with supply chain on that, especially when we're talking about our foreign trade zone. We operate a foreign trade zone in New Jersey, so we're very connected to our ops people because, we have a foreign trade zone at our sites, but we also have a foreign trade zone extended at our warehouses. So if our supply chain people are making decisions, maybe changing a warehouse or changing truckers, we really need to communicate with them because that could impact our programs and our duty optimization, and it could end up costing money. So communication is really key with all of that.
And also, can you tell us about Mark, I need you here. Yeah, I'm just going to keep it in my hand. Talking about foreign trade zones, what are the benefits of foreign trade zones for companies?
So the foreign trade zone have been around since I think the 1930s, and the purpose of them was to keep manufacturing jobs in the United States. So there's an incentive for U.S. companies to keep the jobs here and build the economy in the U.S. And as part of that, you're allowed to bring your raw materials in either for manufacturing or distribution without paying the customs duty on those. So you can either fully eliminate the customs duties or you can significantly reduce them. So depending on what your organization does, you can be a distributor and get the deferral. If you export, you can completely forego the customs duty. So depending on your operation, there's a lot of different advantages.
And it's not easy to have one created, so it's a lot of work.
Yeah, you need political support, you need to write your congressman. We work with Foreign Trade Zones Board to get that, and we've been operating as a foreign trade zone for 25 years, pretty much.
And what are some of the trade regulations you've had to address in the last few years? And how do they actually impact supply chain and other stakeholders in the company?
I think, the big one right now is the forced labor. We have to make sure, so what we do in trade compliance is we work to make sure that any new regulation coming out, we will work with whatever internal stakeholder it impacts. So if it's, we have an FDA Bioterrorism Act, so we worked with our sourcing people on making sure that any flavor products that came into the country, the suppliers were registered with the FDA. With the Forced Labor Act, which is pretty new, you have to make sure that your suppliers, so report the manufacturer to customs and make sure they're not using forced labor in your supply chain. So not only once it gets to the port, but you have to show customs that you have a due diligence process in place with your corporate policies to make sure that all along your supply chain, all your partners, not only your suppliers, but the manufacturers, that they don't use forced labor in their supply chain. So that's a pretty new one. It's pretty...
I've also seen some of our customers who, they have containers on the water, and it's coming, and they find out, or customs finds out, or there's some sort of analysis where that product came from was, had forced labor. And particularly, I had a very large retail customer, particularly I had a very large retail customer where they found out they had many containers coming. Some of it was cotton and some of it was non-cotton. And any clothing in those containers that were made of cotton had to either be destroyed or exported out. I can't remember what that's called, TE something. So it's speaking about, putting out fires like you asked in the beginning. I mean, I know it's not related to the pandemic, but it happens all the time. So you have to find a warehouse, someone you can rely on, and most of the times they want it to be a non, where they don't have to pay duties, so it's bonded warehouse, and they have to sort the cotton versus the out of the non-cotton, and then they had to export the cotton out. So there's a lot that goes into play when customs cracks down and finds something.
And if you don't have that in place, they'll hold that container until you show them that support. So it could impact your supply chain and your customers and your manufacturing operation. So the more work you do upstream, the better. Yeah. And also, I'm sure you guys are involved with CTPAT, Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism, and that's a supply chain security program that's been around since 2001. And essentially, Customs calls it pushing back the borders, and it's a volunteer program, and Customs looks at your supply chain from the point of origin where you place the PO to the time the product arrives at your door. So that's where we engage a lot with our supply chain team to make sure that we're using truckers that either are part of that program, and if they're not part of the program, do they follow the security guidelines for that, our freight forwarders, and then we also send questionnaires to suppliers as well to make sure that the product that we're getting from overseas, that their facilities are safe for anything destined to the United States. So there's a lot of interaction between trade and operations. So, communication is key. Start as early as you can in the conversation, get a seat at the table when decisions are being made, because you don't want to have something stuck at the border and then have to go back and say, oh, sorry.
And this again can be for any of you. Could you talk about logistics risk management that helps, say, analyze cargo loss during transportation, and what measures companies are taking, or specifically your companies are taking, to prevent such losses? And obviously, the circumstances that lead to cargo losses differ for each organization. What kind of embedded analytics are companies using to facilitate that visibility? track and trace. Analytics used to gain insights into the sources of stress and how companies are responding to it. I mean, what kind of analytics, predictive, prescriptive, whatever type, is being used to enhance the visibility? Just give us a flavor of that.
There's a lot. From a security standpoint, I mean, documentation is a big deal. Weight, dimensions, there's devices they can put on the product to see if the product's been tipped, because if drugs are getting moved in product, they tip it upside down and put it in there to get it out. Pictures of product is another way to keep track of it. Most freight forwarders have tracking and tracing. They have a tracking number. It's a barcode, and it's scanned at every point, supposed to be scanned at every point that it touches. But there's anything you want to add?
Well, as a freight forwarder, we do have that technology tool that we offer our customers. So pre-pandemic, everyone was interested in reducing costs and making their supply chain more efficient. But post-pandemic, now everyone wants technology and visibility, and we always had that, but now it's tenfold, because they want to be able to be resilient and adaptable, and things where they didn't necessarily need that when things weren't shooken up, by the pandemic. So now our tool helps customers gain visibility, see all the milestones from A to Z, and be able to track and trace, run reports, metrics. So these are all things that help you as a supply chain manager to really wrap your arms around what's going on globally. And if you have containers all over the world moving around, a tool like we have, or like other competitors have, gives you the ability to manage it much easier than going to multiple websites and figuring it out.
So seeing your container where it is in real time.
So it's a GPS tracking of the container, but it's also all those milestones, because it's fine that the container's on its way, but as you know, has it been cleared 5 days prior to arrival? Was the ISF filed on time? So there's a lot of steps that you need to be proactive before it arrives here, or else you're going to hit demurrage. And demurrage was probably, if you ask me the #1 word that I heard during the pandemic, it was demurrage. And it's always been a thing, right? You've always had to worry about it, but I mean, when your container is at the port and a trucker's there to come pick it up, but they can't pick it up because it's in a closed area, and the only reason it's in this closed area is because there's so many containers they can't get them out. So they were paying demurrage for longer than could ever imagine. So demurrage was always a...
And also, I'll point out that the more information that you have, the more options you have to be able to resolve problems and delays. So if your product is stuck on the West Coast and you're expecting it at a warehouse in the Midwest to get unloaded and then sorted and put away and then picked from to fill either e-commerce orders or retail orders or wholesale orders, and that's behind and it's not going to happen for 6 weeks, then you can look at having that container diverted, having it transloaded, having it sent to another warehouse, and hopefully shipped to your final customer quicker.
I just want to add something too. So for us, you were talking about risk. So, working with our supply chain to change the Incoterms to put a little bit more of the risk on the supplier in those cases. And then also, for Firmenich, what we have done is we've participated in several customs programs. So we're a member of Importer Self-Assessment. We're a member of the Chemical Centers for Excellence and Chemical and Pharmaceutical Center of Excellence, which really, if we have an issue with something not being released, we can contact our account manager at Customs and say, hey, we did everything we're supposed to, what's the delay? And they kind of walk us through that and help us get it released quicker. Also, part of the foreign trade zone is expedited release. I wouldn't say expedited release through Customs, but it's a faster process because you're not doing the technical Customs clearance. You're doing a reporting to Customs and then delivering it to your foreign trade zone. So it's a little bit faster. And as far as analytics, you mentioned that a little bit. Just from an optimization standpoint, what we do is we go into custom systems, the ACE system, and we look at our trade data, and then we're able to analyze that based on, port of export, country of origin, and then see if we're taking advantage of either free trade agreements or special trade programs, maybe that we can go back to our sourcing team and say, hey, you imported this from this country, but some from here, this one has a free trade agreement, bring this one into another location, but bring this one into our foreign trade zone and we can avoid the duty. So that information is really critical for us.
Last thing on that real quick. One thing I've noticed just in the last few months, because of the delays that were experienced in the backlogs on the West Coast last year, the risk and threat of strikes from the longshoremen on the West Coast, a significant amount, and I believe the percentage is only 6 to 8%, but that's still a big number, of all imports from Asia are now coming into the East Coast and the Gulf Coast. Savannah, Georgia, and Charleston, North Carolina are two of the fastest growing ports in the country. So there's a lot of companies out there that are being proactive, and they're doing things differently to say, hey, what can we do to prevent this from happening again like last year?
Just a strike in France, too, right?
I think another thing that kind of changed over the past years is everyone's involvement now in e-com. It changed the landscape of the supply chain. So speaking about risk, there's a lot of risk when you have to automatically change your whole supply chain. And yes, e-com was always around, but it was, really taken to a new level. Companies who had never done e-com before all of a sudden had to change their ways. We've heard about all the retail stores that during the pandemic had to close their stores. So it changed the platform of which everyone worked with their supply chains. And service providers like Jim and I, we had to also change the way we were doing things. So it was just an interesting time, and speaking about risk, there was risk there, of course, doing something new, but we all kind of adapted and made it work.
I have a couple of questions from the in-person audience. Jacob, you want to start?
I just want to ask if you think that private or public companies are better suited to deal with supply chain disruptions from your experiences?
Yeah, for me, I don't think it's so much public versus private, but maybe small versus large. If you want to assume that smaller companies are private and bigger companies are public, that's not always the case. But in my opinion, smaller companies are going to be able to be more flexible, more nimble, be able to react quicker. They're going to be able to jump out and lease a warehouse, buy a truck, make a change in vendors and suppliers, where bigger companies, they have a lot more corporate red tape, they're slower to react, but also they've got a lot more resources, they've got a lot more money, so they're probably more capable. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, in my opinion.
Yeah, and Furnish is a privately held company, and I agree with what Jim said. I think it's more related to the size of the company versus private or public.
Connor?
As you have already briefly mentioned.
From a warehouse standpoint, just getting people to come to work was very difficult in the warehouse industry and also in the transportation. During COVID and the lockdowns, we were in the essential category, so I went to work every day throughout the pandemic, and it was hard to get people to come into work in the warehouse. After the pandemic and with the economy, with inflation, with wages going up, it's hard to get people to come into work in a warehouse when they're getting money for staying home, or they're able to make more money doing something else. It's challenging. So we've seen wages go way up. And that's been a big challenge because somebody has to cover that cost and customers have to pay for that, and then that ends up going to the cost of the product. So really just getting people to come to work, people who want to work, and then being able to afford the wages that they're demanding was the two biggest challenges we had.
I mean, I think for Firmenich, I mean, you know, we're in a little bit different situation. You know, we are our manufacturing company, and, you know, we have long-term employees, and we were able to stay open during the pandemic because we were an essential company. So we didn't really experience that as much. We have long-term employees, generational employees, so that wasn't an issue for us.
Yeah, similarly with our company, we don't have the same labor type issues that like a warehouse would have, but the owners of my organization did make the decision to go 100% virtual. I think during that time they realized that everyone could be, if not, you know, more productive at home. So it worked out in our benefit. And then once things started to open up, they said, you know, do you guys want to go back to an office or do you like working from home? Half the people were like, I moved to Florida, I moved to North Carolina. So it worked out. So we're still 100% virtual, and it's great. So we're happy.
And Nicole had a question on sustainability. I think you specifically for with respect to Firmenich, right? Because you're known for sustainability, and so go ahead, Nicole.
So my question was, what would happen to your sustainability efforts if being sustainable becomes too expensive?
You know, sustainability and ESG programs are just inherent in our ethics and the way we do business, and they take it very seriously. We have quite a few, you know, accreditations in different areas, gender equality as well. So I don't think it's something that they would just forego just because it became a little more expensive, but, you know, it's just part of the culture. So, I mean, and we are going to be having a session at Firmenich in April, so if you want to know more about that, we can talk a little bit more about that.
From my customers and what I was hearing from them, pre-pandemic, sustainability was actually a very big topic right before the pandemic hit, and many customers had initiatives and things in place to make sure that they were, you know, had sustainable initiatives. Then the pandemic hit, and all those conversations went out the door, but only momentarily. But there was just so much focus on, well, we need the product before we can even focus on anything else. So it took a turn, and now it's starting to come back. So those conversations are now more about, you know, carbon footprint and partnering with organizations that have a sustainability program. So it's back on target of being a topic.
Are there any other questions? Comments? Go ahead.
As far as the GPS tracking on the containers, and you said you're able to kind of see where it is. So how much data is tracked with that? So if I like click it onto my screen, can I see if stuff's been cleared? Is it, you know, PO numbers, transfer numbers, stuff like that? How intricate is that? Like,
Yeah, absolutely. It's very detailed. So as an organization, if we are your booking agent, we're booking the container at origin and we're filing the ISF as your customs broker, we have all that data. So historically, companies have always had the data. It's just how do you make it customer facing? So now tools like the ones we have gives that information in a, you know, digestible way. And I mean, every bit of information down to what's inside the container, all the information on the entry, the documents are there in PDF, so they're all scanned into the system. The milestones, like I said, you could see the ship and where it is in its voyage, and then, you know, what are the legs that are still to come. So there's a lot of detailed information. I could always do a demo if you want. Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah. Advancements in technology is really what's happening right now, and just providing that type of information to our customers to be able to have proactive conversations. So quarterly business reviews is huge for us because you're going in your day-to-day business all the time and you're moving along, getting shipments here, but you don't necessarily stop to look at the information. So we really push quarterly business reviews and bring those types of metrics to the table, and then create new KPIs, you know, to be able to be proactive. And you could set alerts if there's something particular, but those QBRs is really where it's important.
So I imagine your customers then will use your data to come back to you and say, you know, all these containers are released, but this one's a priority, make sure the trucker picks up that one first, and is that how you coordinate with your customers?
So yes, that's definitely something that's happening, but that's more like the shipments coming. I'm talking about more, you've had 3 months with this past quarter, what are you gonna do differently with the next quarter? So an example, if you want me to share it, an example is, so you have this information about which customs entries were filed late. So that's a big deal if you have late entries. And without any data, you would just look at the customs broker and say, what'd you do? You were late, you didn't file this on time, and now there's all these issues. But instead, if you really drill down, which I just did in a quarterly business review, you could see that in order for us to clear 5 days in advance, we need documentation from the supplier 10 days in advance prior to arrival. And we can show what day each supplier gave us that information. So for these 3 customs entries that were late, we did not get the documentation from the supplier until 3 days prior to arrival, even though we were constantly at the same supplier for the information. So what that does for us is now we can have a proactive conversation and say, we need your help, customer. Can you please speak with your supplier and say how important it is to get us this documentation 10 days advance to, you know, arrival? And so that's really where those conversations can go, and it just pinpoints more details. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, I don't need a microphone. My wife says my voice is my microphone. But for all these budding supply chain management experts, what are the skills that you would want us to be teaching them that they should be getting better at, whether it's communication, Excel, whatever it is?
Economics, it's all about money. Geography is important. You need to know where China is, where, why we need a train to get from LA to Kansas City, things like that. I think there's so many, I think I was talking to somebody over dinner earlier about, you know, supply chain management degrees are out there, and they're very targeted to the industry, but there's a lot of people that work in the supply chain, including I think the 3 of us, that don't have supply chain management degrees. And any background can work well with it. It's just if you have the passion to learn the industry, but the skills that you need are communication skills, accounting skills, and really understanding the customer, and what makes things, why it's important is really my point.
I agree with that, and just add data analytics to that as well.
Or you could go down my route and just teach them sales. I'm a salesperson, so my mom says I could sell ice to Eskimos. So I think if you have some sales, you know, training, it's always helpful.
Yeah, and of course for me, I think international business, you know, and customs and trade compliance, and it does go hand in hand. So look for your customs broker license or some international trade courses or certificates.
Anybody else? Okay, go ahead, Ben.
One is whether you consider the effects of the pandemic over. Has it completely come back to normal, or is there a new normal? And then, of course, what did you learn? What would you take away from the experience? Great
question. I'll take the first stab at it. The delays are over, the backlogs are over. There is a new normal. The costs have come way down from importing containers, but labor rates are sky high. Operating costs are sky high, fuel costs are sky high. There's still shortages of labor, so there's a lot of challenges still out there. Something I think that gives us hope, and something that I've learned from it, and I think a lot of companies have learned, is that we can't rely on imports for everything. And something that I've seen just in the last few months is exports in the last 3 months in a row are up. And that's something that has not been true for 10, 20 years. So January, February, March just continued to increase. I think March it was up 12% over February. So I think a lot more companies are starting to look for American manufacturing and not relying so much on importing all their goods and all their materials.
For me, I think we've realized how important partnerships really are and building relationships with our customers. So, you know, we don't want to just be a transactional service provider and just doing the bare minimum to do it. Now it's much more a partnership, and how do we have those conversations, and how do we be a partner to make sure that you grow? Because I think I said earlier, it's all about adaptability and being resilient, and now's the time to learn from that and to be able to really work together. And, you know, as our customers grow, we grow. If they hurt, we're hurting. So it's important to create that partnership.
One other thing I've seen from a lot of my customers is not just looking for export opportunities and manufacturing here in the U.S., but a lot of manufacturing has shifted out of China to India and to Vietnam. So a lot of big manufacturers have closed their plants in China and moved them to India and moved them to Vietnam. And that's been a big change in the last 6 months.
Okay, this is building off of Professor Lowe's question, actually. I was just wondering, like, so we're talking about a lot of COVID problems you guys had. What's a problem you're having, like, right now? Or is this the calm after the storm? Like, are you just calm, or is there any more problems that you're seeing?
Yeah, but it's so much better. So I would tell you I'm pretty happy with the way things are going. We're still having challenges with wages and costs. It's still hard to hire new people because we're growing, and as we add warehouses and we add customers, we need more people to help us unload trucks and pick orders and drive forklifts, and that's still a challenge. But from a supply chain standpoint, while the cost hasn't hit the bottom yet, it will, and then it'll probably come back up. Yeah. So one of the things you can always count on is change. So you just have to deal with it as it comes. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say as an importer, warehouse space, trucker availability still are a bit of an issue.
Talking about change, could you brush up on with the developments of automation and AI rapidly developing today? How have you seen this development throughout your years of experience? Because it looks like it's rapidly changing today, and I worry about how can I stay on the same level of with AI. And do you have any advice for a prospective student who is looking to major in supply chain management with considering the development of technology today?
My company in particular, for my company and my competitors, AI is used a lot because there's a lot of tedious work, paperwork, you know, scanning documents into the system, or, you know, putting numbers in, making sure that things match. So there's a lot of tedious work in my industry on the freight forwarding side or customs broker side. That type of work has now been a little more automated. The reason that I say to you, you still have a really great future in supply chain, you wouldn't have wanted that job anyway. The jobs that we want supply chain managers for are the ones that are going to have the business analytics to say, okay, this customer needs this, or this trade lane would be best for here. And there's much more in that type of intelligence that we need, we don't need the people to do the busy work. That should be a computer. The type of, like, if you're getting your degree, it's going to be used in a great way for either on our side or on the customer side.
Yeah, and I would absolutely agree from a warehousing standpoint. Getting a good education in technology and artificial intelligence, that is the future. You're right, it's moving a lot faster from an e-commerce fulfillment standpoint. There's robots now that are picking orders, and we need people to be able to program them and work on them and help us develop the technology and make it faster and cheaper, because that is absolutely happening, and that is the future, and you've got a bright future there if you're able to.
Thank you. So essentially you're talking about problem-solving skills and how we can bring that into the industry. Yeah.
Anybody else? Oh, yeah. Okay.
So I think it was Linda that you mentioned there's a lot of data that goes into your business, and you're basically giving a lot of data back to your customer. So how is some of that data related to, say, like, you mentioned there's fees that go into having containers at the port, right? Or excessive fees that go on with having a container at the port for a certain amount of time, or unreliable trucking, or things like that, problems with drivers. How does that data factor into what you're reporting to your customers?
Those are all really important milestones. So when I talk about the milestones of that supply chain, that's really where that comes into play. And it's all based on timestamps, because that's really what it's about. When's the estimated time of arrival for that particular milestone, and then when's the actual? So if you have the estimated and the actual, then in conversations you could talk about what those delays are. And with our technology tool, it just calculates everything for you to have those smarter conversations. So it's yes, there's the GPS tracking, and maybe there's someone sitting there watching it go from, point A to point B, but it's much more about the data and how to analyze it, or if it's a hot shipment, then you might be looking at it.
Do you have a question?
Yeah. I guess specifically as a third-party logistics company, you may encounter some issues where, there's spoilage or obsolescence that comes in with products, and you may have to, decide what to do with the product. Has that happened more as, warehousing becomes more expensive with so many products in there? And what do you choose to do to, reduce that, or make good decisions to, bring the product, into some value in the later years of its life where it may actually not get the full value that you had originally had it as?
I absolutely saw a lot of it. It's really up to our customers. Sometimes they will sell it at a discount. Recycling was something that we had to do a lot of, things that were especially made out of metal. I can tell you there was container loads of product that ended up just getting scrapped for recycling because they were obsolete. Yeah, it's a very complex issue. Great question. And I don't have the secret sauce to how do we prevent that in the future, because when something is 6 months late and the customer's canceled their PO and they're no longer going to pay $700,000 for the product, the customer has to figure out something to do with it. Recycling is the most environmentally friendly option, but a lot of times it gets sold at a big discount, and someone loses a lot of money. Yeah.
Anybody else?
I was working for a contract manufacturer, did a lot of military government work, and we always had a slew of paperwork, and it sounds like you guys run across that. And I'm curious, how long do you have to back stuff up? How much? I mean, we would have, after a couple months, a couple skids of transfile boxes, and we had to keep some of them for a very long time. And I'm just wondering, since you guys all seem to have your hand in that pot, if you could elaborate on your storage techniques and stuff that you've encountered or doing.
For customs record-keeping requirements, it's 5 years from the date of import, but depending, like if you're operating a foreign trade zone and your last finished good was used 2 years after the import or a year after the import, so it extends that. So what we've done is we, ask customs if you can keep them electronically. You can get permission from customs. You can store them electronically. You get permission to store it off-site. So, but at a minimum, 5 years for sure. Yeah, and there's a place you can write to customs and get the permission for electronic.
Linda, you guys are all
Yeah.
electronic.
Yeah, I knew Laura had the answer, but that would be my same answer. I mean, we store it electronically for our customers, but there's rules and regulations as the importer of record, and it's 5 years.
Anybody else?
I had a quick question.
Yes, go ahead.
If you knew about the pandemic beforehand, what actions, what steps would you have taken to prepare for it?
Can you repeat it?
What would you have done?
Yeah, what would you have done?
Move to Brazil.
Hired more people. I think hire more people was probably one of our biggest issues, because the things that would have taken one person all of a sudden took 3. And so it was just overwhelming, and it used to be pretty smooth and created a lot of chaos. So probably hire more people in advance.
Yeah, absolutely. Hire more people, and if I could go back to before the pandemic, as much money as we could find to try to get more warehouse space, and buy it. Absolutely.
Yeah, buy a steamship line. Make all those millions of dollars they made.
Hindsight.
Yeah.
It's 20, so. Anybody else? Okay, so I think we're just about, right? It's about
7:25.
It's about 7:25. If there are no questions, Lindy, Laura, and Jim will hang around and talk with you for a while. And there are some snacks outside for you so feel free to interact with them, interact and network with them. Okay, thank you all. Huh? Yeah. Lindsay, thank you, Laura. Thank you all for coming. And we have some door prizes for